My name is Ivy Callahan, second daughter of the Callahan family. They used to call us the perfect trio. Mother, Miranda, once a strategic advisor for an international investment fund. My sister, Bianca, born to shine, always center stage, front row and praised. And my father, Roland Callahan, founder of Callahan Capital. A man whose name quietly moved millions behind closed boardrooms. And me? I was the second daughter. Not rebellious, not remarkable, not dazzling, but not disruptive enough to be cut from the family photos. A quiet child growing up among spreadsheets, champagne flutes, and perfectly timed embraces for the flashbulbs. I learned early how to move through life as though I didn't take up space. Polite, invisible, and careful not to trouble anyone with my existence. And just as early, I learned that instinct is the only thing that might save you in a world where smiles are masks. And affection is rationed based on perceived return on investment. I and my daughter was coming to my sister's wedding party, but in the moment the taxi turned into the gates of the Beaumont Hotel, something inside me tightened. I shouldn't have come here. It wasn't fear, more like recognition, as if my body remembered what my mind hadn't quite formed into words yet. That feeling wasn't unfamiliar. A kind of quiet, smoky warning that had trailed me all my life. I knew Bianca too well to expect anything kind from her. Not because she was evil, at least not in the way villains are written in children's books. Bianca was the kind of person the world adored. Beautiful, sharp, confident, the kind of woman who could hush a room just by walking into it. But to me, my sister had always been a fine, precise wound. It didn't bleed, but it never really healed. I sat at the back of the ballroom, gently brushing Aria's soft hair. She was so excited. Auntie's getting married like a princess. She'd repeated no less than a dozen times all week. She had no idea that the pristine white dress was a symbol of all the things I never got to have. But Aria was different. To her, this was just a happy day, with a wedding dress, cake, and glittering lights. I'd made myself a promise that my wounds wouldn't become shadows trailing her childhood. I swallowed that familiar sense of being out of place and smiled. Just one afternoon. Then I'd take her home. No one could hurt me anymore. Or so I thought. Then Bianca stepped onto the stage, holding a microphone, smiling like a seasoned actress. And I knew my instincts were never wrong. I remember the first time I realized my mother didn't really like me. It wasn't hate, not even resentment. She simply didn't see me, as if I were a blurry version of Bianca, a rough draft that never made it to print. If I got good grades, she'd say, "Bianca once got a full scholarship." If I wore a gray sweater, she'd frown and comment, "You look washed out." When I told her I was pregnant, at 23, she said nothing for a very long time. I remember that evening so clearly, the night I came home with my heart shaking in my chest, still believing, foolishly, that family meant something. I sat across from her in the living room, spacious, immaculate, cold. The fireplace crackled, but no warmth reached the air between us. "I'm pregnant," I said. No preamble, no apology. I once believed that the truth had weight. But in this house, everything was measured in status and reputation. She looked up from her teacup, her gaze pausing on my face for a second, then drifting past me like I'd just told her I failed a yoga class. She wasn't shocked, just disappointed in that curated, polished way of hers. "Who?" she asked. Cold, clipped, each syllable enough to crush whatever flicker of hope I had. "Ezra," I said softly. "He works at the Arts Center. I brought him home once." "The cellist from that fall festival?" she interrupted, arching an eyebrow. I nodded. No master's degree, no family in finance, no pedigree worth introducing at dinner parties. She kept going, each word like a quiet indictment already delivered. "Are you planning to give the baby his name?" I clasped my hands together. "We haven't decided yet, but Ezra." Bianca descended the stairs at that moment, her heels clicking against the wood in perfect rhythm. She folded her arms, leaning against the armrest like she was watching a particularly boring scene in a film. "You know, Ivy," she said, her smile not even pretending to reach her eyes, "everyone goes through a rebellious phase. Most people backpack or dye their hair purple, not get knocked up by an unknown artist." I didn't respond. I knew anything I said would be twisted into foolishness or emotion. "Mother will handle this," she said after a pause, as if issuing a press statement. "We'll make sure it doesn't get out. Don't let anyone from the society pages see you like this, especially not before the Henderson Gala next week." I wanted to say I didn't need them to handle anything, but I didn't get the chance. "Where's Dad?" I asked, suddenly realizing I hadn't seen him since I arrived. Mother shrugged. "London. Board meeting with the European branch. He'll find out eventually, but it's better he doesn't. His heart's weak." A weak heart? I almost laughed. The only person in this family who actually had a heart, and he was the one kept in the dark. That night, I left through the back door. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I just carried one quiet promise with me. I will raise my child with the kind of love that never existed in this house. When I left that house, I took nothing with me except an old suitcase, a little money saved from part-time hours at the university bookstore, and a folded ultrasound tucked into the pocket of my coat. No one came to see me off. No parting words, only murmurs like, "Just make sure the press doesn't find out," or "disappear for a while." I rented a top-floor apartment in Lavender District, where rain leaked through the ceiling and the stairs groaned every time someone walked on them. But in that space, I was real. No one knew who the Callahans were. No one called me the outlier daughter of Roland Callahan. Ezra moved in after my first week in the hospital. I had been admitted for severe morning sickness. He was awkward, fumbling, but his eyes never left me. He wasn't rich, wasn't good with numbers, but he knew how to wrap a scarf around my neck when I fell asleep on the couch. He knew how to place his hand gently on my belly and whisper, "Hey, little one, your mama's having a hard day today." He wasn't one for grand declarations of love, but every morning he brewed the perfect cup of peppermint tea. Because I once told him I couldn't stomach coffee during pregnancy. I used to think, if my life had to be just this small, Ezra, the baby, and our little apartment, it would still be warm enough. But then came the accident. A truck skidded off the road on a rainy night. The call came just as I was folding baby clothes. I remember standing motionless at the open door, still holding a pale yellow onesie in my hands. I didn't cry, I just sank to the cold wooden floor, back pressed against the wall, and thought, no, he hasn't even bought the car seat yet. Arya was born 3 weeks later, and I understood then why people call motherhood a kind of salvation, because if not for her, I might not be here at all. But loss wasn't finished with me. The next to go was Elise, my best friend, my old coworker from the bookstore. She cried when I told her about Ezra, then insisted on coming over to check if this broke musician actually deserved you. She was the only one who held my hand at my father's funeral and said, "I'm here, okay? Whether you want me to be or not." Stage 4 lung cancer. Elise never smoked a day in her life. She just grew up downwind from a paint factory. Life can be cruel like that. Even the cause of death feels unjust. I thought the world had left me just one thing, Arya. And I made a promise. I would never let anyone hurt her. Not ever. I knew exactly what Bianca was about to do the moment she picked up the microphone. It was the kind of smile I'd seen 100 times, lips curved but her eyes never smiling. To strangers, it might look charming. To me, it was a warning flare. Someone's about to be made a spectacle. And unfortunately, today, that someone is you. Before we move on to dancing and champagne, Bianca began, her voice sweet like icing on a cake that's been sitting out too long, "I have a special little surprise for everyone." I tightened my grip around Arya's hand under the table. She was nibbling on a macaron, eyes wide and curious. At table 23, Bianca continued, drawing out the words like a show host. "We have a very special guest, my sister, Ivy Callahan, and her adorable little daughter." Scattered laughter rippled through a few tables near the stage. I saw heads turn. Some guests furrowed their brows politely. Others chuckled, light, careless laughter, as if they'd just been offered a bonus performance in the middle of a gala. Ivy and Arya live a different kind of life. Bianca paused, just long enough to let the implication sink in. Not as glamorous as what we're celebrating here tonight, but perhaps all the more intriguing? A few playful oohs echoed. I felt Arya begin to shrink beside me. She stopped eating. Her eyes flicked around, trying to understand why the entire ballroom had suddenly turned to look at us. "So tonight," Bianca said, stepping down from the stage with the grace of a woman who thought herself invincible, "why don't we auction off an afternoon tea with Ivy and Arya? A one-of-a-kind experience. Tea with the single mom of the year." She raised her arm like a seasoned entertainer. Laughter swelled. Louder this time, bolder, as if someone had flipped the switch that gave them permission to mock. A woman in a sapphire silk gown, one of Bianca's high school friends, raised her hand first. $100, she said, "but she has to read poetry while we sip." So delightfully bohemian. The room cracked with laughter like a wave hitting tile. A man in a dark tux scoffed, "200, but the tea has to be in my basement, soundproofed, of course." A few raunchy chuckles rose from the table on the right. Another girl, maybe 25, pearl earrings swinging, raised her wine glass. $300 if Ivy wears a 1960s dress and calls me madam the whole time." I felt the blood drain from my face. Every joke wasn't just a cut to me. It landed like a blade on Arya, too. She clung to my hand now, trembling, her tiny face buried in my side, fighting not to cry. I stood. "Long." Arya's voice wavered. I bent low, whispering, "It's okay, we're leaving." I'd already turned, already taken that first step out of this pit of snakes, when the voice came. $2 million. Silence. Not a single breath. The entire sapphire ballroom, once bursting with champagne clinks, laughter, and polite cruelty, fell into a hush so deep it hurt. I turned. So did everyone else. He stood at the end of the aisle. He didn't need to say his name. No one asked. Julian Royce. He was looking straight at the stage, at Bianca, who froze mid-smirk, lips parted like she'd forgotten what she was supposed to say. "I'll pay $2 million for that afternoon tea with Ivy Callahan and her daughter," Julian said, calm and clear, not a trace of hesitation in his voice. "Not because of your little game, Bianca, but because I can't stand another second of this circus of humiliation." No one laughed. The room felt vacuumed of air. Julian scanned the tables, not with anger, not outrage, but something colder, disgust. Then he turned to me, gave a slight nod. "You okay?" It was the first time all night someone had asked me that. I didn't answer. Julian was already walking up to the stage, hands sliding into the inside pocket of his coat, and I knew. What came next wasn't just a rescue. It was a declaration of war. Julian stepped onto the stage like he'd been born for it. No spotlight needed, no script, and certainly no permission from anyone in the room. From inside his jacket, he pulled out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A few people had already recognized him, a veteran attorney in the investment world, known for orchestrating deals that made Rosebridge's elite sit up and pay attention. Bianca tried to keep her face composed, but I saw her hand tremble, clear as day from where I stood. "If I may," Julian said, his voice low but firm, "I'd like to take the floor for just a few minutes. Not to bid for afternoon tea, but to put an end to a humiliation masquerading as entertainment." His eyes flicked briefly toward Bianca, "and to carry out the final wishes of Mr. Roland Callahan, Ivy's father." My heart slammed against my chest. Hearing my father's name in this room, spoken by the one person who had stayed connected to him after he left, it caught me completely off guard. I hadn't known Julian was still here. Hadn't known he'd never stepped out of the Callahan orbit. Julian held the envelope up. This is the final, legally binding will of Mr. Roland Callahan, signed June 14th, 3 years ago, in Zurich, Switzerland, notarized and witnessed by 3 independent parties. From the front table, my mother rose to her feet. "This is absurd," she snapped, her tone shrill, stripped of its usual elegance. "Roland left everything to me and Bianca. It's all been settled, legally." Julian didn't even look at her. "What you received was the preliminary will, the one Mr. Callahan deliberately allowed to surface. This," he said, holding up the envelope, "is the true document, delivered to me under explicit instructions, to keep it sealed and silent unless the future he feared became reality." Julian broke the wax, pulling out a set of documents, then nodded toward the AV technician. A high-resolution scan of the will appeared on the projector screen behind him. The title was clear and sharp. "I, Roland Callahan, leave all personal assets, equity in Callahan Capital, and privately held properties to my second daughter, Ivy Callahan." I held my breath. Julian looked up, his gaze sweeping the crowd before landing gently on me. At the time this will was drafted, Mr. Callahan was unaware that Ivy was pregnant. But he included a supplemental clause that should Ivy have a child, that child would become her successor in inheritance. On the screen, I saw a single italicized sentence beneath the primary text. "All rights and assets inherited by Ivy Callahan may be transferred to her biological child at her discretion." Julian continued, his tone soft but resolute. He didn't know that Arya had already come into the world, but he had prepared for the future he believed Ivy would build, wherever she was and with whomever she chose. My vision blurred. Arya's name wasn't on the page, but she was there, in every line, every clause, every quiet, deliberate choice my father had made. He hadn't known he had a granddaughter, but he knew I would not live in the shadows forever. And he had left a path of light, waiting for me, if I was strong enough to walk it. My mother shot to her feet before Julian could finish. "No, this is a setup." Her voice cracked, no longer controlled, no longer cold, just raw panic. "Roland wouldn't do this. He would never abandon me like this." She staggered toward the stage, but Julian calmly raised a hand to stop her. "Mrs. Miranda Callahan," he said, his voice returning to that crisp, professional tone, "for the past 3 years I have been authorized to monitor all financial activity related to Callahan Capital, and I'm afraid this will is not the only shock waiting for you." He nodded. A second projector screen lit up. Page after page of transaction logs, wire transfers, and asset files appeared, each one time-stamped, sourced, documented, detailing millions siphoned from corporate funds for personal use by my mother and Bianca, used investment insurance funds to reserve a villa in Santorini, paid for a 500-guest birthday gala, anonymously funneled assets into accounts in the Cayman Islands. Julian read each item like he was listing off inventory, not indictments against a once-celebrated family name. Bianca screamed, "He's lying. This is a scheme. My father, he would never do this to me." Julian didn't even glance at her. He pulled one last envelope from his briefcase. "Perhaps we should let Mr. Roland speak for himself." I stopped breathing. He unfolded a letter, handwritten on monogrammed paper bearing the name R. Callahan. His voice softened, slowed, but each word cut through the years of performance and pretension like a scalpel. "To Ivy, if you're reading this, it means Julian has followed through on our agreement. I'm sorry you've had to live 3 years in silence, in coldness, in a kind of forgetting that you never deserved. But I needed to be sure that you wouldn't remain the girl cast aside in that house, but become the woman who could rise from it. Not just for yourself, but for something greater than everything your mother and sister have ever stood for. I don't know whether you have a child now, but if you do, I hope they grow up in a world where kindness matters more than reputation. I believe you'll create that world. I've always been proud of you, And though I didn't say it enough when I was alive, I never stopped loving you. Roland Callahan. I don't remember if I cried, but I remember Bianca standing frozen, like the air around her had turned to glass. And I remember my mother collapsing into her chair, her face stripped of every trace of the powerful woman she once played. I heard Arya whisper, "Mom, Grandpa knew?" I bent down, nodding gently. Yes, sweetheart, he knew. And he believed in me. Julian stepped forward, holding out his hand. Let's go, Ivy. The rest will be handled by the court. I stood up and took Arya's hand. I didn't say a word to my mother. I didn't look back at Bianca. My steps weren't fast, but every one of them echoed with weight, as if I was walking out of my past, one footfall at a time. For the first time, I didn't leave a place as someone who didn't belong. For the first time, I was Ivy Callahan. Not the sister made a spectacle of, not the forgotten single mother, but the one who was chosen. The headquarters of Callahan Capital stood at 900 Monarch Avenue, a 12-story building of glass and steel, exuding quiet wealth without a need for show. I'd passed it 100 times in the past, each time only stealing a glance from a distance. It always felt like a world I wasn't allowed to enter. This morning, I wasn't standing on the outside anymore. Julian was already waiting on the front steps, dressed in a light gray suit. The early sunlight struck his glasses, casting a sharp, glinting line across the lenses. He didn't say anything, just gave a slight nod when he saw me walking up with Arya. Good morning, CEO Callahan. I gave a small smile. I haven't signed anything yet. You already did, the day you chose not to break. We stepped into the lobby. People in suits passed by, nodding in greeting, no longer with curiosity, no longer with avoidance like at those family events long ago. This time, it was recognition and respect. The elevator carried us to the 11th floor, the office of the chair of the board. A bronze plaque waited quietly by the glass doors, etched with my name, Ivy Callahan, Chief Executive Officer. I paused for a moment. Julian didn't rush me. Arya held my hand tighter, looked up at me, and asked softly, Mom, are you scared? I knelt down just a bit. A little, but your grandpa believed in me. What about you? I believe too. I pushed the door open. The office was wide and bright, sunlight pouring in from 3 sides, spilling across walnut furniture and bookshelves that reached the ceiling. In the corner stood an old photo. My father mid-meeting, sleeves rolled up, his smile understated but his eyes burning warm. I walked over and placed my hand on the frame. Your granddaughter is here, I whispered. And we won't let this name be disgraced ever again. Julian placed a folder on the desk. These are all the documents related to the leadership transition. The accounting, legal, and PR teams are ready to take direction from you. And this? He opened the second cabinet, pulling out a dark leather notebook, its corners worn with time. Roland's work journal, market expansion plans, HR strategy, even little notes like review education fund clause. You should read it. I took the notebook, flipping to the first page. My father's handwriting was so familiar it made my eyes blur all over again. Ivy asks questions differently. I think she understands the market in her own way. I let out a quiet smile. Let's begin, Julian. He nodded, and in that moment his eyes held more than the look of a lawyer. He was a friend, a witness, and maybe, just maybe, something more. 1 year later. The house we lived in wasn't large, but every window spilled sunlight. The backyard had a little garden where Arya and Julian grew herbs and strawberries on quiet afternoons. Today was Christmas. The scent of cinnamon and ginger drifted through the kitchen, and soft lights blinked from the windows all the way down to the steps. I had just placed another batch of cookies on the tray when Arya ran in, clutching a large card cut from red paper. Mom, look, I made it for Grandpa. I knelt down and took the card. On it was a wobbly drawing, a man in glasses and a suit holding hands with a little girl. Beneath it, in uneven letters, I miss you. Thank you for believing in Mom. My heart ached, not from sadness but fullness. so full there was no room left for bitterness. "He'd be so proud of you," I whispered, and pulled her into a tight hug. Julian walked in behind us, wearing the scarf Arya had knitted, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Are my favorite girls ready? Guests are arriving soon." I nodded. Today's guests weren't investors or journalists, just a few former employees of Callahan Capital, people who had quietly supported me when the rest of the world turned away. And 2 more, Martha and Bianca. They had come that spring, unannounced, without gifts. Just eyes that truly understood guilt and apologies that didn't ask for redemption. I didn't forgive them right away. But I didn't shut the door either. My father once wrote, "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's refusing to let the wound lead the way." And I believe Arya deserves to know that family, even when broken, even when misshaped, can still be mended if there's enough courage to try. I stepped to the front door, watching snow fall soft and slow as a car pulled up to the gate. My mother stepped out first, holding a tin of cookies, nodding at me with the quiet awkwardness of someone who didn't know what else to say. Bianca followed behind, in a plain sweater, carrying a toy Arya used to love when she was little. They were no longer the women who looked at me like I was a stain. They were just 2 lost people, trying to find their way back. I opened the door, said nothing, just stepped aside and let them into the house and into a new chapter. That night, after everyone had gone, Julian sat reading while I sat by the window, gently running my fingers along the wooden frame that held my father's photo. Arya was already asleep, curled around her teddy bear, dreaming in a world where cruel laughter no longer found her. "What are you thinking about?" Julian asked, not looking up from his book. That I wasn't wrong after all. He smiled. "I knew that the moment I saw you walk Arya through the preschool gates, head high, quiet, and full of fire." I leaned against his shoulder, eyes drifting out to the snowy street. Rosebridge winters were still cold, but for me the frost had long melted.